Hey, this is Paranormal Girl. Jesse James and the Treasure of the Lost Templars. A small island off the fog-shrouded coast of Nova Scotia may conceal the world's greatest treasure, that of the Order of the Knights Templar. Missing since the 14th century, the treasure of the Templars is reputed to contain massive amounts of gold and silver bullion, the crown jewels of royal European families, religious artifacts sacred to both Judaism and Christianity, and documents that may be as explosive now as when they were buried. The current owner of what has been dubbed the Money Pit estimates the value of the potential treasure to be over $1 billion. The history of Oak Island excavation begins in 1795, when three young men with time on their hands decided to search for Captain Kidd's booty. On tiny Oak Island, they found a ship's tackle hanging from a tree branch and a nearby depression in the soil. After digging 2 feet down, they reached a level of carefully laid flagstones, not normally found on the island. They dug further and at 10 feet reached an oaken platform. Successive platforms were found at 20 and 30 feet, encouraging the diggers but surpassing their abilities. Several years later, a company, the Onslow Syndicate, was formed by several prominent citizens to explore further. The oak platforms continued until at 90 feet level, an inscribed stone with a simple code revealed that treasure would be found only 40 feet below. The code may have been a false clue leading them into a booty trap. The shaft was soon filled with seawater that would not only stop further excavation, it would remain an unbeatable obstacle for the next 2 centuries. A series of flood tunnels had been dug from the coves on both sides of the island. The seawater entered from clog-proof drains concealed with coconut husk and eel grass. For nearly 200 years, work has continued in and on and off fashion as one treasure hunter after another would invest one fortune after another in pumps, in drills, in cofferdams to stop the seawater, and even heavy construction machinery. To date, the Money Pit has yielded only a handful of items in exchange for millions of dollars and 5 lives it has claimed. Gold chain and iron scissors, a piece of undecipherable parchment are among the paltry rewards to date. There has been a wealth of theories. The popular but implausible treasure of Captain Kidd has holes, the largest being that most of Kidd's treasure was found on Gardiner's Island, just off the eastern end of New York's Long Island, where the Gardiner family had allowed a host of pirates access to his domain. Hidden payrolls of French and British ships are possible, but the motive of constructing such massive vault is thin. From Vikings to UFOs, Aztecs to Huguenots, the list gets longer, but the combination of means and motives is the litmus test. One plausible theory has a battered Spanish treasure ship driven off course by storm, diverted by currents to Nova Scotia. Mining engineers construct the booty trap vault, hide their precious goods, and attempt to return to Spain to get a stronger ship. En route, another storm finishes the work of the first. The crew and their secret perish. Until the Money Pit gives up his treasure, the debate will go on unresolved. Concurrent with 200 years of excavation, the owners of the Money Pit and several independent researchers have been attempted to determine just what treasure does lie below the surface. In 1954, the owners of the money pit received a letter informing them that the treasure below Tiny Oak Island was not pirate gold, but a treasure of far greater value. The treasure, the owners were told, would contain sacred relics and gold of the Temple of Jerusalem, together with manuscripts and documents that will add to man's knowledge of human history. From other sources, the belief that the documents concealed may include the earthly genealogy of Jesus Christ, the Holy Grail, according to Holy Blood, Holy Grail authors. It may not actually be a chalice or a dish, but a bloodline extending from King David through Jesus to modern times. One intriguing clue is that Sir Francis Bacon wrote a preserving important document in mercury. Flasks with a residue of mercury have been found on Oak Island. While the debate remains unresolved, the indisputable truth that someone with a great deal of knowledge and engineering expertise went through a lot of trouble to conceal something, and that they finished their complex project at least before 1795. The carbon dating process pushes the dates back as early as 1390 and as late as the 1660s. Who might have had the motive to construct such an elaborate complex before European colonization reached Nova Scotia? Who would had such an important treasure to protect? And who might have had the ability and the manpower to design and construct such a device? Around the year 1118, the 9 men that made up the original Knights Templar returned to France from Jerusalem. Ostensibly, their mission had been made to make safe the roads for Christian pilgrims visiting the Holy Lands, a seemingly overwhelming task for a handful of men. The real purpose might have been completely different. The early knights stationed themselves in the stables of Solomon's Temple and basically conducted a treasure hunt. When they returned, they received a hero's welcome and were the subject of St. Bernard's attention. Bernard of Clairvaux preached so powerfully on behalf of the Christian warriors that he built the tiny group into an order, rivaling his own Cistercians. The difference was that the Knights Templar were warrior monks, pledged to the church and their order, answering to no one, no earthly power otherwise. Young men from wealthy families of Europe flocked to join the order, pledging their inheritance. Nobles donated land and estates. Soon the temple would grow into Europe's first bank. Europe's first families would pledge jewels and land as collateral for loans from the Templar Bank. Ironically, Templar success would contribute to the order's downfall. Nobles grew envious of the wealth and the power of the order, but it was not until the crusading armies lost Jerusalem and the Templars surrounded the last Christian outpost that anyone would challenge the order. And then the challenge was so great, the order would fail. The debt of King Philip of France to the Templars was great, in terms of both the money they had lent the king and in saving his life from the mobs of Paris. There was, however, no mutual admiration between the borrower and the lender. When the king asked to join the order, he was refused. His hostility to the order induced him to mount false charges against the Templars and to bring in the Roman Pope. In one fateful day, Friday, October the 13th, 1307, the armies of France would attack Templar headquarters and arrest hundreds of knights. They would be tortured until they confessed to any charges levelled by their torturers. These included devil worship, homosexuality, spitting on the cross, and worshipping an idol in the form of a severed head. Many would die during the torture. Others would be burnt at the stake. While the goal of defeating the order had succeeded, the real goal of King Philip had failed. Before the fateful October day, the Paris Temple, the headquarters of the world's only bank, had been tipped off. The treasures had been loaded on wagon trains and carried overland to the port of La Rochelle. There the wealth of the order was placed aboard Templar ships. The Templar fleet then simply disappeared. The destination of the Templar fleet had been debated since. Templars might have found refuge in Portugal, where their organisation survived as the Knights of Christ. They might have found refuge in England under King Edward, or would take his time in seeking out and persecuting Templars. The numerous islands off the west and north coasts of Scotland are very likely refuge. Templars and the King of Scotland had much in common. Both suffered under the ban of excommunication, and both would soon be under attack by King Edward of England. Robert the Bruce earned his excommunication by stabbing his rival to death on the altar of the Grey Friars Chapel. He gathered 2 important bishops and several nobles, and had himself declared king on the stone of Scone. After Robert the Bruce declared himself King of Scotland, he had ironically become an outlaw. He spent years living in caves, losing one family member after another to the English, only to emerge victorious at the Battle of Bannockburn. While history records many wars and battles where the English army was the better trained and better armed force and went to battle against the Scots, who were reduced to throwing spears and rocks, Bannockburn was different. The Scot forces at first seemed to be retreating, only to pull the English army in. Then a fresh force of knights emerged. Surprise to the English was devastating, and they had expected an easy rout of their enemy, only to find themselves fleeing for their lives. Scotland won its most critical battle in the War for Independence, and the day was June 24th, sacred in Templar tradition as St. John's feast day. Robert the Bruce was from a Norman family and had been part of the 1066 invasion. So were the Sinclairs and the Roslin. So were the Sinclairs of Roslin. The Sinclairs and their French relatives of Sinclairs were instrumental in creating the Knights Templar. In a time where families were often as powerful and nominal kings, both French and Scottish, Sinclairs wielded great power. The Scotland branch would soon command a navy as great as any in the 14th century Europe, and their ancestral home became Templar headquarters in hiding. In 1398, almost a century before Columbus, Henry Sinclair of Roslin would lead an expedition to lands in eastern Canada and New England that had been visited by the Norse for centuries. His pilot was Antonio Zeno, who kept detailed records and maps of the voyage. Landing in Nova Scotia on the 2nd day of June in 1398, Sinclair sent a small army to explore. He would send his Italian navigator home, and he would remain for at least one winter. From a base in Canada, Sinclair led a small army south. In Westford, Massachusetts, a skirmish with the native residents culminated in the death of Sir James Gunn. The Scottish force would leave a detailed carving in stone with the clan Gunn coat of arms, which is still visible today. Another knight, unidentified, died or was killed on the route south. His skeleton and suit of armour to be discovered in Fall River in colonial times. The most remarkable monument to their expedition was the construction of the octagonal Templar chapel in Newport, Rhode Island, modelled after the Church of the Holy modelled on the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Templars would erect such structures in various places in Europe. The only other such temple in Scotland was in Orkney, where the Sinclair family ruled. The Newport Tower would later become a matter of great debate, although the earliest European explorer to view the Rhode Island coast was Verrazano, who recorded it on his map. Evidence of the pre-Columbian expedition would be brought home as well. Starting in 1436, the Sinclair family planned the construction of a remarkably complex chapel in Roslyn, with carvings of pagan heads and items allegedly unknown in Europe until after Columbus, like cork husks and aloe. The brought construction workers, masons from all over to build the chapel and to construct a massive hiding place in rock that could hold a treasure as well as an army. While the masons arrived in 1436, actual work in Scotland did not begin until 1441, and it would make little sense to employ workers for 5 years without putting them to the task. More likely they were at work. The Sinclair fleet had brought their army of masons to the soon-to-be-discovered New World. They would construct the booby-trap money pit, using engineering skills known both to the Templars and St. Bernard's Cistercians. The deep shaft, the long water tunnels, the false beach, and concealed drains were all put in place. For a century, the Templar treasure would rest safe in Roslyn. The descendants of the Templar Knights would soon become organised as Freemasons and employed and protected by the Sinclair family. When James II became king, he decreed the Sinclair family to be the hereditary guardians of the Freemasons. This connection has not been severed in Scotland. The affairs of state and religion, however, would soon bring the clan Sinclair to war again. Protestant mobs, inspired by Calvin, would sweep through Scotland. The target would be icons in Catholic churches and the Sinclair family. Ardent Catholics gathered up at the gold chalices and other goods of church they supported. The English crown, now in Protestant hands, rose against the families that controlled Scotland. In 1542, the Battle of Solway saw defeat for Scotland and the loss of Oliver Sinclair, the right hand of James V's reign to England capture. The king predicted at the birth of his daughter Mary that his family dynasty would end. He placed Mary, later known as Mary Queen of Scots, in the care of the Sinclair family. Oliver Falaf from England, from an English prison for a short visit to his home in 1545, disappeared from Scotland and history. The premise of a book called Lost Treasure of the Knights Templar is that at this time the treasure was brought to Oak Island and sealed away. The remaining head of Clan Sinclair, William, would share the existence of the secret of Mary of Guise, the most powerful woman in France, and part of the extended Norman family. She proclaimed a bond of obligation to William. His secret shown to us, we shall keep secret. The existence of a vault would be known as the Guise family, but the location would be a secret passed only within the family Sinclair. Subsequent wars and religious strife took a serious toll on the family. Along the way, Sinclairs would die suddenly, in war, in prison, and possibly of natural causes. At some point, the secret location was not passed down to the next generation. Today, the most modern assault on the money pit will start anew. David Tobias, the current owner, first heard of Oak Island and the treasure search when he was a pilot training in Nova Scotia during World War II. He came back to Oak Island and the search for its treasure, first as an investor, soon as the owner of half of the island. He was not only brought millions of his own money to the table, he had brought the treasure search up to modern standards. Under his direction, the search was employed and consulted with corporations and with talent from the National Museum of Modern Science at Ottawa and the prestigious Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. In December, his group was granted a new treasure license, extending for 5 years. Once recent legal hurdles were overcome, Tobias and his group, known as the Triton Alliance, will again challenge the capabilities of the guardians of the Templar treasure. So, where does Jesse James come in all of this? Well, you'll be very surprised. I'm now going to read Jesse James' secret map may lead to the Templars' treasures. Descendants of Jesse James, author Daniel J. Duke, uses a template encoded with Kabbalah, gematria, and provided by the American Civil War Secret Society Knights of the Golden Circle to link sites of lost treasures, not just buried by his great-great-grandfather, but going as far back as the Knights Templar. The 8th century 7 cities of gold searched for by Spanish explorer Francisco Vázquez de Coronado and the Bruton Vault. Descendants of Jesse James. In 1995, in Houston, Texas, just out of college and working for an engineering company, says the author of this piece, my mother, Betty Dorset Duke, called me to the office and told me she had some news, inspired by family legends. She had gathered evidence providing the old West American outlaw Jesse James was our ancestor, and that he did not die as the conventional accepted version of history claims. Instead of relying just on our word and on family legends, my mother took our family photos to the experts of the forensics laboratory of the Texas Department of Public Safety and 2 other experts. All 3 verified that our family photographs and tiny types of my great-great-grandfather, who lived under the alias of James Lafayette Courtney, matched the image of the outlaw Jesse James. The Knights of the Golden Circle's treasure template. Research also pointed towards a secret society known as the Knights of the Golden Circle, or KGC for short, which was a pro-Confederate organization founded in mid-1850s with the goal of preserving slavery and creating an empire based on agriculture and labor provided by slaves. This empire was projected to be centered in Havana, in Cuba, and was to encompass an area included in the southern portion of the United States, Mexico, and Central America, and the northern portion of South America. The group is said to have included men such as Albert Pike, John Wilkes Booth, who was the assassin of President Abraham Lincoln, and Jesse James, who is said to have been inducted in his early teenage years when he was fighting as a Confederate guerrilla during the American Civil War. I have yet to see evidence that Jesse and Albert Pike were members, he says. And also Daniel J. Duke has also written a book called Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure. Now that would make for a very interesting read, don't you think? So what's your thoughts on the lost treasure? And what about Jesse James? Do you think he knows or knew where the treasure was? Or had he actually passed on secret maps to his family? Let me know in the comments below if you actually know anything more about this story. And doesn't it kind of resemble the film that I believe Disney created called... And don't you think this resembles the Nicolas Cage film National Treasure? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd be interested in your thoughts on the Knights Templars. Thank you for listening.